What I think gender violence is pretty much discrimination against a person based on how they choose to identify in regards to gender, and it could also have to deal with like transphobia and like queer bashing and homophobia, so because it attacks that aspect of that person.
What I think gender violence is the attack on women's bodies and queer bodies from different players on campus, whether it be assaulters, whether it be murderers, whether it be robbers, or even the university itself, because it doesn't care to deal with the gender violence that's happening.
I mean, gender violence it can be a lot of things. I mean, like when we think about it, when it comes to mind, we think first of all of like physical violence, but I think gender violence goes like a lot broader than that. And I think it's kind of like the manifestations of patriarchy that like people see in their everyday life. So that can be things like, like kind of jokes about like sexual assault that work to normalize sexual assault. That can be homophobia. I think is a form of gender violence. It's policing people's genders. It's saying that if you are born with a certain set of parts, that you're either a man or a woman, and therefore you have to be attracted to the opposite sex. And living in a society that doesn't allow for like same-sex expression of like love and sexuality easily, like I would see homophobia as being like a form of gender violence, and also transphobia once again being a form of gender violence. And I guess for trans people, like we face like so many barriers, like working within a university system and like working within kind of the barriers of bureaucracy.
How gender violence, I think, is manifested at York University is very unique. There's a lot of slut shaming that happens at York. In 2007, 2 girls were raped because they left their residence doors open. Girls in Scott Library have been getting assaulted throughout the years. There's been numerous incidences of girls walking into the York Village and getting assaulted on their way home because there's a lack of adequate lighting in the village. Queer students are being beat up. At Seneca, just this past December, a gay Iranian student had his neck slashed. The past semester before that, so the school year of 2010-2011, queer woman got beat up because she didn't look right. And it had momentum the 3 days that issue was reported, but after a week, no one cared about it anymore. So I think the very interesting way that gender violence is manifested at York University is how the incidences happen, but yet they're time sensitive towards people's attention, as in they happen, a couple of days go by where everybody's talking about it, and then nobody cares.
I transferred to York because I heard a lot about York being this awesome, progressive, like lefty, feminist, queer positive school, and I'm still surprised like about the amount of stuff that I encounter. you know. And I feel lucky, like on a personal level, like I haven't faced physical violence on this campus. I don't feel that I've faced like even like harassment and stuff personally, but it's the little things like the microaggressions, if you will, like things that you hear in people's classes, like having to explain, you know, the like kind of like subtle like homophobic comments or like racist comments that like people make, like those affect people as well, you know. And I think like when we talk about stuff on campus, we don't often talk about like what happens in the classroom, but like that's the space on campus where I feel the least safe. Because as a trans person who has like mismatching ID, like I've had to go to every one of my professors for like the past like 3 years and like out myself to them and be like, oh, by the way, I'm a transsexual and this is the name I want you to use. And sometimes they don't get it right, you know? So like I have a prof I've had to explain to her like 3 or 4 times, like that's not the name I use, but we'll still call out my legal name like when we're doing attendance. And I feel like a tightness in my chest whenever that happens, because like I don't want, you know, I don't know who these people are. Like, I'm just thrown in like a room with like 80 random people that I don't know. And like, that's not information I necessarily want people knowing. And I've heard that like the administration is like working to fix that. Like, and that should be done by the end of the year. I'll believe it when I see it. But like those like simple little things that like affect trans people are these like bureaucratic nightmares that like we fall into. It's like boxes and forms and bathrooms and doors and like all of these things that like we don't like often, you know, that like people don't think about, but like make like every little moment of your life like really anxiety inducing. The queer and trans community at York has done a lot of work over the years around bathrooms. And I mean, I am glad that we have like gender neutral washrooms on campus in like some spaces, and that's really great. And I'm glad that the option's there and that there are accessible washrooms as well. Not everywhere, but like they're working towards it, you know, and like every new building that's built, like everything that's renovated, like those are there. And the university like has like pamphlets with guides for where you can find that. And I really appreciate that because that's not something I found at other schools. However, bathroom policing still happens, and like we're seeing this case recently of a man who sneaking into women's washrooms and like using and like taking pictures of people, and that is a form of assault. Like that is not acceptable. At the same time, like when I see like calls out for like call security if you see like suspicious things in the washrooms, as a trans person, that makes me really nervous, because am I gonna be, you know, or like if be policed like when I go into spaces, like how are other trans people, how are trans women specifically going to be affected by this on campus if like women are being told to watch out for men in their washrooms? I think that really ties into looking at the fact that like gendered washrooms aren't things that keep people safe. You know, like all it really does is tend to marginalize people that don't fit into those boxes, because like there's nothing, like we have someone who is assaulting women, there's nothing to stop this person like from going into that room, you know, like and it's still happening. And so I think like what we really need to do is work at having like community accountability structures around this and not like policing gendered spaces, because I don't think that really would work to keep people safe.
At night I do maybe look over my shoulder once in a while kind of thing, like be careful of where I am, because I am a pretty androgynous person, so I don't want to be a subject of gender-based violence or anything like that. And like in the past I've heard of gender-based violence on campus before when it regards to bathrooms and stuff like that, and it's usually an anxious place for me is bathrooms, because, you know, like I said, I have an androgynous look, so I feel like when I go to the bathrooms I do feel like I get discriminated against because of how I look, and like I do get looks and stuff like that, and the little things like that does bother me, so I don't want to, I'm scared what if one time I go in there and I'm in a dangerous situation.
They told me my body was safe. Through conceptualizations and theories that proved my identity was situated comfortably on one end of the gender binary. They told me my body was safe through male privilege, washrooms, doctor's offices, voice. They told me my body was safe because my pronoun would keep them away from the contouring of my chest and the gap between my thighs. Safety comes with limitations, spectrum rules, and stipulations. And we must recognize that every gender fluidity is different for every fluid gender. They tell me my body is safe, free from protection, community direction, and every time I look over my shoulder when I'm in a gender washroom. If they're telling me my body is safe, then why is my body always being questioned?
So with the MetTrack audit, I guess it's kind of complicated just because the way that it's set up, or the way that at least that the administration is going through it, they focus on a lot of the physical security aspects of it just because I feel like that's the easier thing. It's easier to throw money at a problem than to think of ways to solve a problem culturally because it's just such a more complex idea.
I think that we need to recognize like where this is situated, where we're situated in the city of Toronto, and what that means when we're calling for more policing on campus and if we're asking for like our safety as students. Because quite often when sexual assaults and when violence has happened on campus, the university has been really quick to be like, oh, it's not students, and like blame people from Jane and Finch. And to ask for more police on campus to keep me safe isn't going to keep that community safe. We look at this where like it was like less than 2 years ago where Junior Mannon was like a young black man from Jane and Finch was beat to death by police on this campus. You know, and like it was a few years before that where like police were assaulting protesters on campus. And for me, like as like a white, like middle class, like trans person, to say that I feel unsafe and like I need to have police like coming into this area, like is not a solution, you know, because it's just gonna work to marginalize more people and it's just gonna work to create more violence on campus. I feel that there's lots of things, like little things that York has done that makes students like less safe, and I think the Village is like a perfect example of that. There has been like a string of sexual assaults in this community, and like when I go by that, it's not a community, it's a bunch of like houses built in the middle of nowhere where like there's not people like active in the streets, like there's no way of, you know, like having that kind of community accountability that keeps people safe. You know, and I think a lot of that comes from like the kind of like racist and classist assumptions that like people at York and the administration has about Jane and Finch. Like if we were to like work with the community to have like some sort of like community accountability, to like have like streets where like people were active on and like that students were going to and from, instead of just like building like this like student housing complex in the middle of nowhere next to an oil refinery, then maybe that wouldn't be happening.
So one of the things on the MetTrack audit is to have mandatory women's studies courses for every incoming student. So I feel like there's at least discussion on that, but there is resistance to having a mandatory course like that.
What needs to happen is the university needs to acknowledge it more in its print media, particularly those LCD TV screens that we walk through when we walk throughout campus. I feel like they need to acknowledge that this is something that's happening, because as sad as it is, like Feminist Action and other groups are trying as hard as they can to like raise awareness, but you know, we can only reach so much of an audience. It's almost sometimes like we're preaching to the choir, right? Like people who are already converted into feminism and queer theory and anti-racism. York University needs to take accountability, and it needs to quickly address what's going on rather than leaving it for months of due process and board meetings. None of that's interesting. None of that does anything other than like make people care less about it. I think they need to also engage with academic departments because academic language often has this like marvelous effect of mediating these emotions that people are feeling. And last but not least, engage with the student groups rather than just pigeonholing them as an area where students can gain extracurricular experience. I think a lot of the student groups on this campus, even the student services like OPERG, SASL, TBLGA, and the Center for Women and Trans, they're doing a lot of good things that are being unnoticed because they're being pigeonholed as a student group. So I think those three things need to happen. Accountability, coordination with the academic departments, because the academic departments have a huge reach in conveying messages to students and engaging the student groups and eventually the student body. Somehow this message needs to get out there that York is not a safe space, right? And something's got to be done.
I know that like we exist in a bubble right now. There isn't like a strong community at York, and I think we need to start building those things. Like I think we need to like take responsibility for one another and like take responsibility like collectively for our safety. Like we see that again happening too with like the woman who was killed in the village over the past summer. You know, like people are isolated in this community, and that's not a way that we're gonna like build a society like without sexual assault and without violence, is by continuing to isolate people and continuing to ask the violent forces to protect us. I don't think we need to like wait for the administration to make change. Like the only way that like things are going to happen is if we organize, if we work better at building accountable communities, and if we keep their feet to the flames and keep the university accountable for implementing the METRAC audit and responding to these things as in kind and not like sweeping them under the rug.
I, the self-elected representative of that particular 10% of the world's population that you would rather ignore, do hereby solemnly declare, with all the power of a bushy-fisting, pussy-eating, harness-toting, dildo-strapping, 100% born and grow, tried, tested, and true yardie lesbian, that it nang go go so. You say this boom bye bye, it nang go go so. Shoot chichi guy, it nang go go so. It nang go go so. It nang go go so. I was walking down the street one day, right there upon Queen Street West, when two white boys are driving by, decided them want come test. Them fling them drinks them after we. Very nearly get me wet. I don't really think them realize how very close them come to death. Cause you say boom bye bye, it nang go go so. Shoot chichi guy, it nang go go so. It nang go go so. It nang go go so. I meet a black man the other night, say him want come hold me hand. Me tell him plain and straight, no, me is a lesbian. Him start to talk about this and that like I should really care. Come check my shock when him start ask me about me underwear. You see this boom bye bye, it nang go go so. Shoot chichi guy, it nang go go so. It nang go go so. It nang go go so. I grew up in Jamaica, and I don't know if you know, but gays and lesbians back home, them face can't really show. But me get me courage up one day, figure tell me family, all of Scarborough hear the news that day, so me need some therapy. You see this boom bye bye, it nang go go so. Shoot chichi guy, it nang go go so. It nang go go so. It nang go go so. We have to do something about this. It really have to change. Lesbian and gay getting bashed every day and nobody find it strange. Gays and lesbians call to arms. Bi and trans, no come with we. We went get some boot camp training, LGBTT army. Cause you say boom bye bye, it nang go go so. Shoot chichi guy, it nang go go so. It nang go go so. It nang go go so. Yes. We're going to get with training, yes. We're going to get with skills. Fight back out police start asking how much straight people get killed. They don't know who them a mess with. They don't realize who we be. Bring your Uzi, bring your harness, put it through, and shoot hands free. It nah go go so.